Hello, my name is Kate Moore, and I'm a librarian with the Maricopa County Library District. Welcome to Orphan Trains, the birth of modern day foster care. Library resources and helpful websites will follow this presentation. New York City, 1853, had a problem. 1850s New York was bursting to the seams. An influx of immigrants from Europe and migrants from the South led to limited housing availability and few jobs. At the time, there were no social safety nets. The ill, poor, and vulnerable populations had only workhouses or almshouses, both greatly unhygienic and grossly overcrowded, to turn to in times of crisis. Children as young as 5 had to work to help support their family. Illness, war, and a horrifically high maternal mortality rate created orphans and half orphans at an alarming pace. Children were left to find food and shelter wherever they could, if they could. If police picked up these street urchins, they would be thrown in jail with adult criminals. Charles Loring Brace. Connecticut minister Charles Loring Brace was horrified by the state of these children when he arrived in New York. He admired street children, boys especially, for their cheery demeanors and their can-do attitudes, and saw unlimited potential in them. However, Brace and much of American society as a whole felt their parents were part of the dangerous classes, who were either responsible for their own poverty due to weakness of character or the displeasure of God. He felt removing them from their current environment was the best way to help them improve themselves. Innovative solutions. Brace went on to found the Children's Aid Society. The society offered shelter for orphaned and homeless children, as well as starting newsboy lodgings, where for a low fee, newsboys and bootblacks could have a bed to sleep in, a place to wash, and a simple breakfast and dinner. Additionally, they set up industrial schools and evening classes to educate children who otherwise would not attend school. Undoubtedly, these ideas made a huge difference for several children, but Brace wanted to do more. The West. The Reverend had no issue with children working. In fact, like most of society at the time, he felt it was good for them. But he also felt strongly that children needed good Christian families to escape their dangerous class origins. It was also well known that the railroad had opened up the West. Land was plentiful and workers were scarce. Why not match these homeless, friendless, able-bodied children with farmers who had plenty of room and needed help? Bryce's idyllic vision of the West was naive at best. In 1954, the Children's Aid Society began organizing the first group of orphans to head out west. Townships were contacted to set up a council of good citizens to vouch for prospective families. Guidelines were established. The children were to be indentured to the family until they were 18 years of age. Until that time, they would help on the family farm in exchange for room, board, and at least 3 months of education per year. An aid worker would visit annually to interview the family and children to make sure it was a good fit. If either party was unhappy, the child would return to the society and be placed with another family. Advertisements were sent out alerting residents of where and when the children would arrive and the application process. Placing out. Back in New York, the children were given 2 new sets of clothing and a suitcase. Their status as orphans was generally self-reported. Little to no effort was expended to verify the claim. They were told that their life was going to begin anew once they boarded the train. They traveled with 1 or 2 aid workers, and at each stop were lined up to be chosen by their new families. More than one writer described the selection process like a cattle auction. Potential parents/employers would squeeze a child's arms, checking for strength, look them over for signs of illness, even going so far as to put a finger in a child's mouth to see if their teeth were healthy. Those not picked would return to the train to be taken to the next stop to start all over again. Siblings were frequently split up, sometimes in the same town where they might keep in touch, but often they lost track of each other for years once the train moved on. It's a great success. The Orphan Trains ran for 75 years, placing out an estimated 250,000 children. Over the years, they developed agricultural training for boys and domestic training for girls so they were better prepared for the duties expected of them. The Children's Aid Society would boast that two writers became governors, others successful doctors, businessmen, farmers, or farmers' wives. Still more served in the military. Many writers would recall the experience as the best thing that ever happened to them, ending up in loving homes and living happily ever after. Or not. The Children's Aid Society measured the success of the program primarily by what these writers accomplished as adults. There were minimal safeguards in place, and unsurprisingly, they were lacking. Many children reported as adults that they were overworked, underfed, and abused. Some were able to communicate this to an aid worker and get removed, but many were not. Marguerite Thompson was treated more as a servant than a family member, forced to sleep on the floor, delivering milk to the neighbors, and cleaning up after the family's boarders. She was denied milk and sufficient food and was frequently beaten for displeasing her new mother. This started shortly after she arrived at age 5 and continued off and on till she ran away as a teen. She was brought back quickly and committed to a convent by her foster mother and was unable to leave until she was 18 years old. And Marguerite actually saw her caseworker every year, but he made no effort to speak with her away from her parents. Many more children simply vanished from the program, possibly running away, looking for a better situation, or returning to New York. Still more were kept as slave labor well into adulthood. It was an impossible task to keep track of all of them, and the children were the ones to pay the price. Those Brace would not help. Brace had a very particular set of children he believed could be saved. Essentially, able-bodied white Protestant children, predominantly boys, would be given the opportunity to go west. Though a self-proclaimed abolitionist, Brace made no effort to contact African American communities in the West to see if they might be interested in fostering. If a Catholic or Jewish child was sent west, it was under the pretext that the child was Protestant. Physically disabled children were rarely placed out, and cognitively impaired children were more likely to be sent south, filling the cheap labor gap left after the emancipation of the slaves. Child prostitutes and others with criminal records were considered too damaged or too much of a risk to be placed in wholesome Christian families. The New York Foundling Hospital. Many other organizations followed Brace's fostering model, the most well-known being the New York Foundling Hospital, a Catholic organization founded by the Sisters of Charity. They began using baby trains or mercy trains about 15 years after the CSA had started placing out. Their methods were quite different, however. The children they placed were generally younger. Prospective parents had to apply in advance, be Roman Catholic, and give a description of the features they desired in a child. If the local priest approved, the foundling would assign a child to a family, sending them directly by trains to their new homes. These children were more likely to be adopted, and many never found out about their past until adulthood. The Great Arizona Orphan Abduction. In many ways, the foundling system of placement was an improvement over the Children's Aid Societies. There was a major incident from right here in Arizona that made its way to the United States Supreme Court. A young parish priest in the largely Mexican mining town of North Clifton approved several of his parishioners as prospective families. However, when white Protestant women saw the children arrive and then sent home with Mexican American families, they were enraged. After learning of this travesty from their wives, the male residents of the neighboring town of Morenci formed a vigilante mob to raid the families' homes and kidnap the newly placed children. For more about this uniquely Arizona episode, please read The Great Arizona Orphan Abduction by Linda Gordon. Controversy. The placing out process was always somewhat controversial. At first, some states objected to New York sending their problems, who they were sure were all thieves and potential murderers, to live amongst them. In later years, as societal views changed, the concern shifted to the lack of oversight provided for the placements. As states' populations grew, they found themselves having to look after their own orphaned and abandoned children. Soon, states began banning the practice of accepting children from outside their borders. The last official placing out took place in 1929, sending a handful of children to Sulphur Springs, Texas. The riders. There are very few living orphan train riders left. Their stories now told through their children and grandchildren. Could you be related to an orphan train rider? Some never realized they were part of a movement at all, thinking that the train they rode on was the only one. Children placed through the New York Foundling Hospital often had no idea they were adopted and struggled for access to their birth records as adults. In the 1950s, historical societies started popping up throughout the Midwest, and riders and their descendants were invited to meet those with similar backgrounds, share stories, and just maybe reconnect with a long-lost family member. The Orphan Trains Legacy. The White House Conference on Dependent Children in 1909 was the first time the United States government considered child welfare as a national responsibility. While the orphan trains themselves were losing favor, the idea behind them, placing children with families rather than institutions or fostering, was not. President Taft created the Children's Bureau, an organization that is active to this day. They advocated for child labor laws and foster care, among other things. Both the Children's Aid Society and the New York Foundling Hospital are still active social service organizations. Learn more. Thank you for watching this brief overview of the orphan train movement. To learn more, visit our website at mcldaz.org. Use the search bar to find fiction and nonfiction about the orphan train riders. Our electronic resources, Hoopla and Canopy, offer books and documentaries, respectively. Genealogy. Are you a descendant of an orphan train rider? With close to 250,000 riders, it's not that unlikely. Visit orphantraindepot.org to find out more information about the National Orphan Train Complex in Concordia, Kansas, including their museum and research center, their orphan statues, and the annual celebration of orphan train riders June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. For those of you who don't want to travel to research, you can also use Ancestry Library, available through our website with your library card. They have lists of children that stayed at the New York Foundling Hospital as well as various Children's Aid Society lodgings. Once logged on to Ancestry Library, these records can be found using search, choosing census and voter lists, and selecting New York, New York as your location. Orphan Trains of Illinois. Librarian and amateur historian Rochelle Gridley has a blog called The Orphan Trains of Illinois. It features an interactive map that allows visitors like us to read actual letters written by guardians and children placed out from the New York Juvenile Asylum. Unlike the Children's Aid Society, these children were placed almost exclusively in Illinois. Make sure to check it out. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Have a great day.